I think I'm going to start a little video series covering the historic areas around Crete, Illinois, where I live. And this will be video number 1. I am sitting in the cellar hole of the McCoy's, John and Sabra McCoy, who were the second non-indigenous family to settle in Thorn Grove. The first was Adam Brown at the corner of Vincennes, or Chicago Road, nowadays Chicago Road, and Sauk Trail, where the Walgreens is at the northwest corner. Anyway, going back to the McCoy's, so this is what an average cellar hole looks like. You know, obviously it's been filled in over the years. When I hear my notes, I'm doing this with not much practice, so I'm just gonna start reading here. I got it. You can see how busy the road is nowadays. The John McCoy family from Vermont came in 1834 and settled west of the Brown family on Thorn Creek. Okay, there's Thorn Creek, way over there. They were the second family to settle in this area. John McCoy was interested in public schools, and he was largely responsible for the establishment of the first public school in southern Cook County. In 1854, when the cholera epidemic was raging, John McCoy was one of the very few who ministered to the sick and helped bury the dead. As a result, he contracted the cholera and helped, which caused his death. His wife, Sabra Clark McCoy, was a real daughter of the American Revolution. Both her father, Andrew Clark, and Andrew Clark's father, who had served as an officer under General Stark in the French and Indian Wars, were soldiers on the American Revolution. Both fought at the Battle of Bennington. Sabra McCoy was a remarkable woman, and she played an important part in the making of early history along the Sauk Trail. Among the Potawatomi Indians, she was known as the Good White Woman because of her generosity to them and her readiness to champion their cause. In the spring, the Indians brought gifts of maple sugar, and in the autumn, they brought cranberries from the bogs of northern Michigan. Like many other pioneer mothers, she had valuable knowledge of herbs and simple remedies, which she dispensed freely to white and red alike. She was also noted for her deep piety. She was a member of the Methodist Episcopal Church, and the first board meetings of that church in southern Cook County were held in her home. So it was held right here. 1836, the very first official religious services to take place in this neck of the woods. The trading post for the Browns and McCoys during their first years of residence in Illinois was Old Vincennes, Indiana, on the Wabash River. With an ox team, this trip occupied fully 2 weeks, both going and coming. The wolves were so bad on these journeys that the pioneers butchered several hogs and cut the meat in small pieces. And when the wolves gathered near them, the travelers would throw out a piece of meat to them. By the time the pork had been devoured, there had been time for the traders to make another mile of their journey. The settlers were glad when a mill was finally established in Naperville, Illinois, because their journey there only required 2 days in each direction. Actually, it says Haperville, but I never heard of Haperville. I'll have to look it up. The Brown and McCoy families allowed a portion of their land to be used as a camping both for the Indians and settlers bound for the west. On the McCoy farm, the frames of Indian teepees could be still seen standing as late as 40 years ago, so late 1800s. In the later years, the Indians had bells on their horses, so it was very easy for white settlers to know when the Indians had come to camp. In 1850, 4 of the McCoy sons went to California in the gold rush. The McCoy and Brown Inns kept many men who were traveling towards California through the years, 1849 to 1853. No liquor was sold at the McCoy Inn. In 1854, these inns also kept overnight many New Englanders who were hurrying over the Sauk Trail to settle Kansas with anti-slavery men. The McCoy home and that of the Batchelders were both of them stations on the Underground Railroad. Negroes escaped from slave owners in Missouri used the old Sauk Trail as a path of safety into Canada. It was night's journey from the station in Joliet to the Batchelders and McCoy homes. Many a time there were as many as 5 or 6 slaves in the cellar of the old McCoy house. And you're looking right at the cellar right there. And then under cover of night, the wagon would start with this dusky freight for the home of Deacon Cushing in Beebe's Grove, Cree Township, pursuant of their dangerous work. The trail, too, was traveled by many New England anti-slavery families who hurried in 1854 to settle the state of Kansas before the Southerners got control. Many covered their wagons with the sign that read, "Kansas or Bust," went by on the Sauk Trail. That finished the first article. And then this says a lot of the same stuff, but it expands a little. I'll read the last paragraph. The trail, too, was traveled by many New England anti-slavery families who hurried in 1854 to settle the state of Kansas before Southerners got control. Mr. T. McClashen, a resident of Joliet today, remembers seeing many covered wagons with the sign "Kansas or Bust" on them. Mr. McClashen also vividly recalls seeing many large flocks of sheep 3 or 4 miles in length that were driven over the trail. Herders and dogs were often so footsore that they could not walk. The herders generally said that they were going to Iowa, pronouncing with a strong accent on the middle syllable. So next time you say Iowa, try to say Iowa. And then, again, this repeats a lot of the same stuff, but expands on a few of the things noted. The few miles from Western Avenue, so Western Avenue is that way, to the Calumet Expressway, which is to the east, had as romantic a history as almost any other road in Illinois. Sauk Trail served for warriors on the warpath as well as on hunting expeditions and trading trips. White and Indian trappers and traders, American soldiers in the Revolution, War of 1812 and Black Hawk War, pioneers on feet and in covered wagons, missionaries, circuit riders, 49ers, California bound, slaves via the Underground Railroad en route to Canada and freedom, all have traveled the Indian Trail, which today is consistently traversed by automobiles traveling at speeds which earlier users would never have believed possible. So I would just wonder what John and Sabra McCoy would think of this heavy, well, now there's no traffic going by. This heavily trafficked road that was just a path back in their day. Again, it's from the 1933 History of Chicago Heights book. The very first settlers preferred the timber areas to the sod prairie ground. This was probably due to the difficulty of breaking the hard sod soil. The open country, as it was called, was covered with wild prairie grass, sometimes tall enough to hide a horse and rider from view. The prairie fires of autumn, which swept for miles through the dry grass, which brought death and destruction to anyone in their path, were sights never to be forgotten. Which is why the very first pioneers in this area would settle in the grove to protect themselves from wildfires, and also it was cooler in the summer in the woods and warmer in the winter. It kept you out of the wind somewhat. And this is a really neat oral history by John and Sabra's great-granddaughter, Florence McCoy Schumacher. So if you know Harriet Gensler, that's Florence is her mother. So this is Harriet Gensler's great-great-grandparents, John and Sabra McCoy's. It's not all that far removed from, the times when Indians roamed the land. Only, 4 generations for Harriet. So I will read what I thought pertained to this property. So this is, I found this on the Park Forest Library site. Their interviewer, Betty Myers, interviewing Florence McCoy Schumacher. So she asks, okay, so what, from your earliest memories, can you describe the area in which the Park Forest now stands? Well, Sauk Trail at that time used to be a lovely road to go from Chicago Heights to the Crete area to Richmond Road and on to Joliet. It was very quiet street, not bustling like it is today. We'd go preliminary to getting to Sauk to Western Avenue on Sauk Trail. We'd go past my great-grandparents' pioneer home site. I remember the second home, they built a log cabin when they first came in 1834. And they were the second white family to settle on Sauk Trail in this area. The old cabin was replaced by a wooden home, kind of a long, low home with a huge orchard around it and big barns and whatnot. So I'm always looking for little clues to solve history's mysteries. And where it says, you know, they first built a log cabin, who's to say that this location is where they built their log cabin? I found a foundation made of rocks north of here on the maybe a couple hundred yards north of here. I'm gonna have to bring a probe and measure to get the dimensions of that foundation. It's under about a foot of soil. Ed Gensler remembers seeing that foundation when he was a kid, by the way, and it's right near the walking path. So if you park at Schubert's Woods, which is how I got here, take the walking path to the west, and right where it veers north, keep on walking west into the woods, and you'll stumble upon the McCoy's cellar and home. And we will go to page 2 of the interview, past page 2. So, your ancestors now, where was this home of theirs that you used to pass as you went down Sauk Trail? From Western Avenue and Sauk Trail going east on Sauk Trail, after you go around the bend, there's quite a bend in the Sauk Trail going east. And you cross a bridge. Just after you cross the bridge, which has been known for many years as the McCoy Bridge, the north side of the street, up on a little knoll, where if you notice, most of the farmers and pioneers usually built their homes up on a little elevation. Not like some subdivisions today where they're down in the low spots, and she laughs. But there was a little elevation there, and the old farmhouse and barns and what not stood there. I'd say it's about a quarter mile east of Western Avenue and Sauk Trail on the north side of the street. Then the south side of the street, it was part of the farm, Old Farm 2, and that was the pasture land, and it was over there that the Indians had a campground, and they would stop at the old McCoy. They'd winter in Potawatomi. Indians would winter in Iowa, and when they'd come through in the spring on their way to Michigan, usually Detroit or around in that area, because the Indians had a special Indian burial ground for chiefs and high important Indians, that they'd take the bodies and bones up there to bury them. Then they'd stay up there in Michigan and hunt and fish and come back through on the Sauk Trail in the fall. And they called my great-grandmother the good white woman, because she would always befriend them, and if they needed medicine or home remedies, if any of them were sick, she was there to lend a hand where she could. In fact, on the area on the south side of the street, some place is an Indian burial ground that my great-grandfather had told the Indians they could use, and that he would never disclose where it was. None of us have any idea where it was. He was a quiet man too, and when the cholera epidemic was in the area, I can't tell you, it must have been I can't tell you exactly when, but he buried a hobo or a tramp that was coming through that died of cholera. And at that time, nobody would bury him, and he said he would. He used a pitchfork and was very careful in not touching the body, but he contracted cholera and died from it too. So that was quite a tragedy. I believe that was 1854 when he died. The Indians that your grandmother befriended, the hobo that was your grandfather buried, they would have all crossed Sauk Trail through Park Forest, wouldn't they? Yes. I don't think you told your grandparents' names. They were John and Sabra McCoy. They came from Rutland, Vermont, in a covered wagon pulled by oxen and arrived in 1834. This territory was not open to white settlers until about 1832-33, when the treaty was signed with the Black Hawk Chief, Black Hawk Indians. It says something about this territory. Before this treaty was signed, any whites that came into the area were in danger of being attacked by Indians who were not friendly to the whites' invasion. After the treaty was signed, all these Indians moved westward. The territory was then safe for settlers to come in. During the Civil War times, the McCoy farm was also an underground railway station. Slaves were hidden there and smuggled out under hayloads and taken to the next station. Now, on the campground that was on my great-grandparents' property, they erected the framework of the teepees, that they would leave the framework there, but they'd take their skins off when they left and went back to Iowa and went on to Michigan. They would put the skins on when they came, and then they'd take them off when they left. And then they would bring this great-grandmother of mine, if they were coming from Iowa, they'd bring her maple sugar, and when they came back from Michigan in the fall, they'd bring her cranberries. And they also had something to give her because they considered her a benefactor. Most of the reading's done. We'll get to sightseeing in a minute here. They were rather scary for the children of my great-grandparents. She's referring to the Native Americans. My aunt told me one story about one time her aunt was there baking, making donuts, and there was a knock on the door. This young girl opened the door, and here was an Indian, and she said she had some donuts in her hand, and she was so frightened she just threw them at the Indian. But the Indian, excuse me. But the Indians, for the most part, the settlers were friendly, but the little children were a little leery. In order for the settlers to get their flour and supplies in the area, they'd have to have their grain ground. They would have to go clear over to Vincennes, Indiana. It would take them 3 weeks each way. The men of the group around that area would get together and go, and the wives and children would stay home. But sometimes my aunt had told stories that they said when the wolves were bad, they would build a fire and great-grandmother and children out across the front of the property to keep the wolves back so they wouldn't come too close to the house. Then the men would often carry pork. They'd slaughter a pig and they'd carry this pork with them so that if a wolf pack came after them, why they'd toss out a piece of meat and the wolves would start fighting over that and killing one another over them. And in the meantime, the men could get on their way a little farther toward their destination, so that's how they progressed. Then they were all very happy when finally there was a mill up north of here. I can't remember just where that one was, but at any rate, it was shortened to maybe 2 days traveling compared to 3 weeks. That's it for her interview. She actually taught at Creek Community High School, Florence Schumacher. And she taught in Park Forest schools. And she was like a pro female golfer, something like that. Extremely good at golf. Okay. So this photo is taken across the street, looking north, and I circled, that's the house, that's the barn. I'm going to take you to the barn foundation in a minute. That's Ira McCoy holding the horses. That was their son, they had 12 kids. So that was one of their 12 children. And if you see that road right there in front of that's Sauk Trail. So I'll try to put my finger on it here. That is Sauk Trail. So that's to the east, and that's to the west. And this is all grown up with brush and woods now, so that's no longer open like that. This is probably the first time photos of the McCoys have returned. This is Sabra, the good white woman. She died, I believe, in the mid-1880s, so she lived a good approximately 30 years after her husband John died. This is in Harriet and Ed Gensler's collection in a beautiful frame. And then we don't have an actual photo of John, but we have an artist's rendition of John McCoy. There's John. And so I'm going to leave these papers here. I'll pick them up before I leave. I'm going to take you around so to view the knoll that they were talking about. So again, Thorn Creek is down there. Of course, Sauk Trail. So you can see they're right at the top of this little hill. Here's the cellar hole. And you know what? I'm going to bring that photo with me of the barn. I'm going to pause it and take a walk over to the barn foundation. Okay, I haven't come across the foundation just yet, but this is the old driveway. Obviously, they wouldn't have called it a driveway back then. Not sure what they would have called it. the entrance to their property, I suppose. You can still see a depression there. And if you look closely at the photo, there's the driveway. So there's the house and the foundation, you know, the cellar hole's over there. This is the driveway. So foundation's over there. I'm going to pause it. Okay, as you can see, a bunch of trees fell right where the barn was. But that concrete pad is part of the barn there. So the driveway's to the east over there, cellar holes to the west. Barn foundation. I know that I've seen more of the perimeter of the foundation than that in the past. However, as these trees get upturned, always good to never know where an arrowhead might pop up. Always good to look at the bottom of those root balls. Well, that's where the barn was, trust me. So I'll just walk back to the cellar of John and Sabra McCoy. Now Harriet's sister's name is Sabra, named after her great-great-grandmother. So this little spit of land, so it kind of goes downhill on both sides. Up creek over there. And back to the cellar hole. Now I'm going to take you across the street to the monument that the Daughters of the American Revolution installed, I believe, in the early 1930s. However, the plaque was stolen off of it twice. Oh, look at that. There's a bleached rock if ever stolen. So the first one was stolen, probably scrappers. This was brass, I believe. And so the DIR made a second one and installed that. And that one went missing. However, it's been located and is being held currently in a safe place with long-term plans of maybe reinstalling it along Sauk Trail. Because what they ended up doing was just engraving the stone itself instead of putting up yet a third plaque. So this is the fun part, crossing the road to get to the other side. And we can look at all the beautiful trash people throw out of their cars. So you may have seen this from the road and always wanted to stop. See, the other two plaques had a whole lot more information. It had all the early settlers' names, including Bells and Batch Elders, who played an important part in Crete history. So if you know how Crete was named, old Mr. Bell on the Batch Elder farm took out his Bible and selected Crete. Well, the old Mr. Bell was the first postmaster of Crete, Henry Bell. And of course, back then, post offices were in the postmasters' homes, and so post offices, quote unquote, roamed. And it was the Crete post office was established, believe it or not, in Cook County near the intersection of Western and Sauk Trail. Back then it would have been the intersection of Richmond Road and Sauk Trail. When Henry Bell from 1838 to 1839 was postmaster, they lived on the southeast corner, and Batchelders lived kitty corner, so the northwest corner of Sauk Trail and Western. Joseph Batchelder was postmaster from 1839 to 1840. And in 1840, it finally moved into Will County, pretty much where Scott's Tires is on, Chicago Road, when Crete's first doctor, Horatio Hitchcock, became third postmaster of Crete. And then in 1844, it moved to the south. The Crete post office moved to the southeast corner of Exchange and Main Street. When Willard Wood became Crete's fourth postmaster, he drew up plans for his town in 1848. And guess what he chose to name the town? He used the name of the post office for the name of his town, which was not unusual. That happened in many, many, many places. These rural areas needed post offices, so you didn't have to travel far. And so they'd develop a post office serving a rural area. Then that area around that post office took on the name of that post office. And so yeah, it's not unusual that the Crete post office existed before the town. That was very common back in the day. In fact, I'm getting into a whole other story. You can view my video on YouTube called How Crete Got Its Name, where I blab on and on for over an hour about how Crete got its name, because the old story was wrong and I was able to prove it using primary sources. Anyway, it's a site of Indian and Pioneer Campground dedicated by Sauk Trail Chapter, NSDAR, 1926 to 1976. So this would have been installed in 1926, and we are actually right on the property line of Adam Brown's and John McCoy's. So they split it right down the middle. It's a north-south boundary line here. Land to the east is Adam Brown's, and land to the west was John McCoy's, and that's where he would bury. That hobo is buried over here. He'd let the Indians bury their loved ones there. There's some nice bluffs overlooking the creek. That's where I think it would be. They often chose, nice beauty spots, they used to call them. And then everybody thinks that the south side was the only spot the Indians camped, which is not true. They also camped in Schubert's Woods on the north side, which is, if you look at the topography, it's much, much prettier over on the north side. The bluffs overlooking Thorn Creek. So that concludes my little video on John and Sabra McCoy, who are one of my favorite pioneer families, because not only did they help on the Underground Railroad, but they also helped the Indians in their travels. So, see ya.